You did everything right. You studied, you got a job, you work hard every single day, and you still cannot afford a decent place to live. Not because you are failing, not because you made bad decisions, but because something fundamental broke in the relationship between what people earn and what housing costs. And it broke so gradually, so quietly, that most people did not notice until they were already trapped inside it. Here is a number that will stop you cold. In 1985, the average person needed to work approximately 1 month of their annual salary to cover a full year of rent. Today, in most major cities, that same calculation requires 4 to 6 months of salary, sometimes more. Same concept, same basic human need. 4 to 6 times harder to meet. And the most disturbing part is not the number itself. It is what that number does to every other financial decision in your life, what it does to your savings, your investing, your ability to build anything at all, your mental health, your sense of whether the future is something you are moving toward or something that is simply happening to you. Today we are going to talk about what actually broke, who it is breaking for, who is still surviving it, and how, and what you can do right now inside a system that was not designed with you in mind, because understanding why this happened is the first step to making smarter decisions inside it. And smarter decisions, even inside an unfair system, still change outcomes. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Meet Layla. She is 29 years old, works in healthcare, earns a salary that by any objective measure should be enough. She is not reckless. She does not overspend. She has tried every budgeting method she could find. She cooks at home. She limits going out. She has done everything the financial advice columns tell her to do. And every single month, she hands over more than half her take-home pay to her landlord. Half. Before a single meal, before a single bill, before a single dollar toward her future. She has looked at moving somewhere cheaper. But cheaper keeps moving. Every neighborhood she researches has gone up since she started looking. Every city she considers as an alternative is on the same trajectory. She is not making bad choices. She is navigating a trap that closed around her slowly enough that by the time she felt it, she was already inside it. And she is not alone, not even close. So what actually happened? Most people think the answer is simple. Too many people, not enough apartments. Basic supply and demand. And that is partly true. But it is the surface layer of a much deeper story. Because this crisis did not arrive by accident. It arrived because of 4 specific forces that hit the housing market at the same time, and none of them are going away quickly. The first force is one that most people have never heard of, and it may be the most significant of all. It is called the institutionalization of housing. For most of human history, housing was owned by individuals, families, small landlords, people who owned 1 or 2 properties and rented them to cover costs or build modest wealth. Over the last 15 years, something changed. Large institutional investment firms, the same organizations that manage pension funds and global capital, discovered residential housing as a financial asset class. And they began buying at a scale that individual landlords simply cannot compete with. Not 1 or 2 properties. Thousands. Tens of thousands. In some markets, hundreds of thousands of homes and apartments, purchased systematically, managed algorithmically, and priced to extract maximum return. When the entity setting your rent is not a local landlord trying to cover a mortgage, but a global investment firm with a fiduciary obligation to maximize shareholder return, the dynamic changes completely. Their goal is not housing. Their goal is yield. And yield means charging as much as the market will bear every single time. The second force is a decade of construction that never happened. After the financial crisis of 2008, housing construction slowed dramatically. Developers became cautious. Financing dried up. Regulatory environments in many cities made building new units slow, expensive, and politically complicated. The result was a 10-year gap, a decade where millions of people were born, came of age, started careers, and needed homes, while the housing stock grew at a fraction of the rate it needed to. The gap between demand and supply widened every single year, And in housing, as in everything, when demand consistently outpaces supply, prices rise. Not sometimes. Always. The third force is something economists call the rent spiral. When rents rise beyond what people can afford in expensive cities, those people leave. They move to cheaper cities. Those cities experience a surge in demand. Rents in the cheaper cities rise. People who were already there get priced out. They move to even smaller markets. The spiral moves outward like a wave from expensive centres. And it means the rent crisis in New York or London or Sydney is not contained to those cities. It ripples outward until it reaches places that used to be genuinely affordable and makes them unaffordable too. This is why moving somewhere cheaper is no longer the simple solution it used to be. The cheaper places are becoming less cheap every year, partly because of the people fleeing the expensive places. The fourth force is the one that lives inside your own psychology. It is called anchoring. And it is silently making the crisis worse for individuals even when their specific situation might allow for better decisions. Anchoring is the psychological tendency to attach our sense of what is normal to the first reference point we encounter. When you first moved into your current city, whatever rent you paid became your psychological anchor for what rent should feel like. Every subsequent increase felt like a deviation from that anchor rather than a symptom of a broken system. This anchoring keeps people in markets that no longer make financial sense for them. It keeps people paying 50% of their income on rent in a specific neighborhood, because that neighborhood is what feels like home, even when their financial life would look completely different somewhere else. Understanding that your sense of what is normal about housing costs may be anchored to a reality that no longer exists is one of the most financially liberating insights available right now. Now here is the question that actually matters. Who can still afford rent in 2026? The honest answer is uncomfortable. Affordable rent. Rent that leaves meaningful room for savings, investing, and building any kind of financial foundation has become the territory of a narrowing group. Dual income households where both partners earn above median wages. People who locked in their housing costs years ago before the most recent surge. People with family support that subsidizes their housing in some way. People in industries paying significantly above average. And homeowners, people who converted their housing costs from a variable market expense into a fixed payment years ago and have watched the market rise around them while their own monthly number stayed the same. Everyone outside these categories is navigating a genuine structural disadvantage. Single earners, people in average wage jobs, people new to a city, people without family support. This is not a personal failure, it is a structural reality. But here is the insight that actually changes what you do next. While the structural forces are real, there is still a meaningful difference between people who navigate this environment well and people who do not. And that difference almost always comes down to one thing: treating housing as a financial decision first and a lifestyle decision second. Most people choose housing emotionally. They find a place they like. They stretch to afford it. They tell themselves it will be fine because income will increase or expenses will decrease somewhere else. And they end up in the 50% trap, with too little remaining to build anything meaningful. People who navigate the rent crisis successfully ask a different question before they sign any lease. Not, can I afford this? But, what does committing this much to housing cost me in everything else I am trying to build? That question changes everything, because it forces housing into a strategic conversation rather than an emotional one. And in a market where the emotional choice is almost always the expensive choice, strategy is the only protection available. There is a concept in personal finance called the housing ratio. It is the percentage of your take-home income that goes to rent or mortgage. For decades, the target was 30%. The research behind that number still holds. People who keep housing below 30% of income build wealth at dramatically higher rates than people who do not. In most cities, hitting 30% on an average salary is no longer realistic, but the principle still holds even if the exact number does not. The lower your housing ratio, the more of your financial life you get to control. The higher it climbs above 50%, the more the rest of your financial life effectively stops functioning. Every decision you make about housing is a decision about everything else too. The roommate you take on to split the rent is a decision to invest. The neighborhood that is slightly less desirable but significantly cheaper is a decision to save. The smaller apartment that embarrasses you slightly at social gatherings is a decision to build something. And none of those decisions are permanent, but their financial consequences compound in both directions for years. Here is your practical takeaway. First, calculate your actual housing ratio right now. Take your monthly rent. Divide by your monthly take-home pay. Multiply by 100. That percentage is the single most important number in your financial life right now. If it is above 40%, everything else you try to do financially is operating under serious constraint. Knowing the number does not fix it, but not knowing it guarantees you will never address it. Second, treat every lease renewal as a genuine strategic decision, not an automatic continuation. When your landlord raises the rent at renewal, that is a fork in the road. Stay and absorb it. Move somewhere cheaper. Find a roommate. Each option has real trade-offs, but treating it as a conscious decision rather than an unavoidable fact changes your relationship to it, and sometimes changes the outcome. Third, if you are in the 50% trap right now, accept that the primary lever is income, not expenses. Cutting subscriptions and making coffee at home are real, but they are not going to solve a problem this structural. The path out for most people runs through higher income, an additional skill, a better paying role, a side income that changes the ratio meaningfully. Small expense cuts feel virtuous, but they rarely move the needle when the fundamental math is broken. Fourth, and this one matters more than it seems, if you have any capacity to save at all, treat it as urgent, not because the amount is impressive, because the habit and the accumulation matter enormously over time. The people who eventually escape the rent trap permanently are almost always the ones who kept building even when the amounts felt embarrassingly small. Because small savings become the deposit, the investment portfolio, the financial cushion that eventually creates options. And options are what change everything. Let me bring Layla back. She did not find a magic cheap apartment. She did not suddenly earn twice as much. She made one decision that felt like going backward. She moved into a shared apartment with 2 other people, something she had told herself she was too old for, something that felt like a step down from the life she was supposed to be building. Her rent dropped by 40%. Every dollar of that difference went directly into an investment account before she could redirect it anywhere else. 2 years later, she had more saved and invested than in the previous 5 years combined. Not because the market fixed itself, because she stopped waiting for the market to fix itself and changed the one variable she could actually control. Here is the thought I want to leave you with. The rent crisis is real. The structural forces behind it are real and significant, and anyone who dismisses this as purely a personal responsibility issue is ignoring genuine systemic failures that are hurting real people. But within that real and genuinely unfair situation, there is still a spectrum of outcomes. And where you land on that spectrum is still meaningfully shaped by the decisions you make inside the constraints you face. You cannot control what institutional investors buy. You cannot control what governments build or fail to build. You cannot control what your landlord charges. But you can control what percentage of your income you commit to housing. You can control how long you prioritize financial progress over lifestyle comfort. And you can control whether every dollar that survives the rent payment gets directed somewhere intentional or quietly disappears into everything else. The rent crisis will eventually shift. It always does. Markets correct. Policy changes, new supply arrives. But the people who come out of this period with something actually built will be the ones who refuse to let a broken system become an excuse to stop building entirely. Your landlord is going to take their share regardless. The question is what you do with what is left. If this video made something click, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content who need it right now. And our next video connects directly to everything we talked about today. We are breaking down the fastest ways working people are building financial independence outside of traditional income. And some of the answers will genuinely surprise you.